No
Greetings
worries.
from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this interview finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And I find myself in not just good spirits, but in fact in quite excellent spirits, and that's due to our guest who has very kindly agreed to take some moments out of his very busy schedule to join us today. And I'm very honored. And he is a guest. He is also a dear friend of mine. And also, he is another hero of mine in the podcast world, the cinema discussion world, the Criterion Collection fan community landscape, and he is what a wonderful, delightful, sharp, intelligent voice when it comes to cinema and podcasting and the like. And so I look forward to the conversation that we will have with our guest, Mr. Travis Trudell. Travis, hello.
Hey, greetings from Arlington, Massachusetts. How are you?
Oh, very good. Thank you. Thank you. And Massachusetts. So right now, how's the weather? Is it
It's spring in New England, which means it's both cold and hot, wet and dry, and lots of pollen. So it's always, and you never know what you're gonna get, and you cannot depend upon the weather here at all. So it's that perfect time of year where you get to stay inside on the rainy weekends, watch a bunch of movies, and enjoy yourself. That's my favorite part.
Yeah, I know that sometimes podcasts and maybe these discussions of mine and maybe discussions in general always start, oh, how's the weather, but I think there's something really nice about how, as you indicated, sometimes those weather discussions are actually very much cinema related because
Oh,
they can right, they can give us the
completely.
opportunity. Yeah.
Completely. That's guilt free. The guilt free staying inside. You know, you
Yeah.
look outside, you see it's sunny, and you're like, oh, I should do something. But now you can be like, oh, nope, it looks like crap outside. I'm going to stay in and watch a movie.
So, but you have very generously uh, agreed to stay in, as it were, and take some of your time to talk to us. So, thank you very much for this. I'm looking forward to this very much, Travis.
I am too. Thank you very much for thinking about me. I enjoyed our discussion when we had you on the podcast a while back, and I'm looking forward to chatting about things that aren't specific to one movie. You know, just kind of speaking in general. That's always fun. I think that's the thing that me and Matt need to add into the complete podcast is just us talking about other things every once in a while because what we talk about before and after each show is just as long as when we're talking about the actual movies. So it's super fun.
Yeah, so that's absolutely great because that brings me to my first question, actually, which is the podcast, of course. So you mentioned the podcast, and I had the great honor of being a guest on the podcast for an episode about the Decalogue. But and also on a past occasion, I did have the opportunity, a really wonderful opportunity to speak with our dear friend Matthew Gasteyer. So, and we did talk about the podcast there as well. But I think, um, it's always good to speak about something that is really exciting, such as the complete podcast. So perhaps for anyone who is watching this and who doesn't know yet the greatness that is the complete podcast, would you mind just giving us a description about what it is and what you and Matt do on that podcast?
Yeah, for sure. So the complete podcast is a podcast in which we pick a director. Usually we try to keep within the realm of someone who has passed, to someone who has a complete body of work that we can access, and we go through their movies one film at a time, in chronological order. and we try to be as complete as possible in seeing everything that that person has done. So it's Matt's podcast. He invited me to be his guest host for the Stanley Kubrick series, and we hit it off so well and had such a great time, and really kind of uh, yeah, we really connected and had it has have a good energy together that he invited me to be his permanent co-host for the show, and so it's been great. We've covered Kubrick, Elaine May, Krzysztof Kieślowski, and we are doing Satoshi Kon right now. And because of my work schedule and because of all the zaniness in the world right now, we've kind of slowed our pace down because sometimes it's hard to really laser focus on a film and really dive into it when kind of your attentions are spread across many different facets. So, but we're excited to, I think we're going to be recording our latest episode either later tonight or tomorrow. And then we'll have one more to do. We're going to do Paranoia Agent soon, which is was a big one for us because it's a 13-part television series that he executive produced and created. And so we kind of went into it thinking, well, it's not like the Decalogue. We'll just do the whole thing. And now we're watching it and we're just like, oh no, what have we done? There's so much to talk about in this television show that it's going to be really challenging. So we kept on putting it off, watching it more and more to kind of, because we like to really go deep into the show. As you know, when we've invited you on, and anyone who's listened to the show, we we try to uh, really kind of run it through its paces and talk about messaging and historical context of when the film was made, and what was going on in that region or that part of the world where it's from, and really kind of dig deep. So sometimes we've been, we're quite loquacious. We speak very long about subjects. I know I think we're one of the podcasts that spoke longer than the actual film 2001: A Space Odyssey. So we do have a tendency to keep going, and it's super fun, super rewarding. There's nothing I enjoy more than spending quality time just speaking about a movie and working through it. Sometimes I get into the podcast and I have an idea of how I feel about the movie, or I have questions about things. And then, it's almost like cinema therapy. You start working your way through the film and talking about it. You start digging into things that you might not have picked up, or themes that weren't uh, very visible to myself or Matt sometimes. And then we were able to work through the whole film and talk about kind of like, how we feel about it and how it works. And it's super rewarding, super fun. You get so much. It's so hard to not like movies after talking about them for hours. You kind of just you can always find nuggets of something that or make it really worthwhile, and so it's super enjoyable.
I love that. I love everything that you say. Thank you so much. And that was that was such a great comment about cinema therapy. I think that was your phrase.
Yeah,
It's really lovely put. And I think that leads me to the next question, which is, are there some examples of some of those discussions that you had on the podcast with Matt, either recorded or maybe offline, as it were? Are there any of those examples that you could share with us as to how that discussion itself made your perspective, say, change or evolve on the spot, as it were?
yeah. I would say I went into talking about Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. Um, that was a that was one that I had a hard time revisiting because I had watched it when I was younger in my teens, and I had one opinion about it. And then as I grew, my opinion changed and changed as I learned more about the history and about Kubrick himself and about the war and about the production of it. And then by the end of that film, I really had a hard time. I didn't like it as much as I did. But going into watching the film, like when I went to podcasts, I didn't enjoy the movie as much as I used to. then as we podcasted and talked about it, I want to say our friend, oh, I can't remember who was our guest that episode, but Doug, um, Doug from oh, I can't remember his podcast off the top of my head either. Anyway, we had a good friend Doug with us that day, and throughout the course, we started talking about all the, the false reality that Kubrick is creating in the film, and the way that it's war, but it's kind of a skewed war. And as a person that is known for detail, he had so much stuff that was just so fake that we couldn't help but start thinking about what he was trying to really say about the nature of war, because it's not the first time he's visited this subject. He has probably one of the best war films of all time, Paths of Glory. And so why revisit the idea or concept of war? And so we started working our way through that, and came out the other end. I had a much greater appreciation for the film than I think going in. The same could be said with Lolita. Matt had a perspective on that changed my mind about a lot of things. Still not about the whole central premise, but about what Kubrick is trying to say about art and being a director in that film. Um, it, it happens. It happens quite often. I use I use movies as ways of helping my own children talk about certain things. If I see they're starting to get kind of stuck with something, or developing some sort of personal, like, habit, or just like a bad kind of attitude about certain things, um, I'll always start gearing our family movie night choices to kind of start helping bringing up these conversation points to talk about these issues in their lives, because sometimes it's hard to have these conversations just straight up. But if you can have a means of kind of connecting with them and connecting with other people through cinema and talking about these bigger issues that then become personal, that's that's what movies are for me. It's you have these films that are witnessed and seen worldwide by many people, but they can always be turned from this whole gigantic universal into something very personal. Everybody has a personal experience with cinema. As much as we go to see a movie in the theater with a bunch of people, it's a collective societal thing to watch this together. But no matter what, at the end of the day, it always comes back to a personal thing. And so that's why I think cinema as therapy helps out a lot, because you're able to mine ideas and concepts and kind of pick things out of yourself that you might not realize. I know lots of people, it's a good way to help people understand about other cultures, a good way to help people understand about different perspectives about things. And so whenever we talk through these films, it it always comes back to that ability to be able to just connect with it on a personal level, which helps me speak about it more clearly.
Mm, that is very well said. And I like how you emphasize the universality and the intimacy nature of a cinema viewing engagement. Yeah, that is, oh my goodness, that's very profound because
It's weird to have something so big yet so small at the same time. It's I mean, same. I mean, literature can be said the same way, and a lot of art is that, it's this idea of something that is, it's a personal thing created by someone, let out into the world, which becomes a personal thing for every viewer. It's such a unique experience and way to connect with each other in society. So that's why art is so important, as you know, as well as you are a huge cinema fan as well. The importance of how movies can connect people.
mm,
Hence why we're here together right now.
from different parts of the world.
Different.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely, yeah. This and the oh, that's great. So, oh, was it Doug?
Yeah, Doug
Yeah, and
McCambridge.
what was it? So it's Good Times, Great Movies, that podcast.
There you
Yes,
go.
Good Times.
Thank you.
Okay, no, no, not at all, not at all. So that's also a great podcast as well, focusing what on the '80s films
Yeah.
specifically. Yeah, that's a really great one.
Yeah,
And
they have some
please, yes.
they have some fun hot takes. I do appreciate their they don't always enjoy every movie they watch, which makes me laugh because it's almost like they're putting themselves through some sort of exposure therapy torture versus only seeking out the stuff that they really want to see. So it's super fun to listen to them talk about that.
And so and it's '80s, right? So Full Metal Jacket also is very right because of
Yeah.
the time that it was released. So okay, that's what was what do you how should I put it? I suppose, and you can feel free to go into as much detail as you want about this, but or be you can be general if you want, however you prefer, my friend. But do you recall specifically what were some of those points about Full Metal Jacket, the film, that you started out maybe feeling on, but that maybe you felt differently upon the rewatch and discussion with Doug and Matt?
Yeah, and I think it was a for me it was a um personal growth thing, like in my mind, in my memory as like a teenager, you know, or even young, yeah, even younger, probably 12, 13. I saw that movie, I think, the for the first time. We were a house that had HBO and Showtime and the Cinemax, stuff like that. We had the full cable package kind of stuff, and I was left on my own to watch many a movies unsupervised. So there were things I probably shouldn't have seen at that age that were very impressionable, but you know, it informed kind of a lot of how I view movies now and think about things. But that movie was more of a it was a growth thing for me. When I saw it, I think I was at an age where, you know, playing soldiers, the idea of being a hero, going off to war. You know, I grew up with a father who served in Vietnam. So there was this, you know, he never, it was a whole thing. He never talked about it. He wasn't happy with his time in the service. He was drafted. But at that time in the 80s, you had movies like Platoon and, Hamburger Hill and the Big Red One. You had all these a total revisit from the baby boomer generation about what Vietnam War meant to that generation, and so we were inundated with these casualties of war. We were inundated with these movies at that time, and so I think I took out of that movie the wrong messages when I was younger, and so watching it older, having different worldviews on things, different ideas about how um, I think the world should work versus how it does work. I think watching that film made me kind of feel like the message for me was different. And so when we started talking about it, we started talking about how uh, you know, it's one of Kubrick's films in which it's a there is no three acts in this film. His movies have a center. You have a part A and part B. He does two-part films most of the time. Clockwork Orange is another two-part film. Uh, Eyes Wide Shut, same exact thing. You do this whole entire process, and then in Eyes Wide Shut, you do the whole process in reverse again. And same with Full Metal Jacket. You have training, and then you have the war. And so to watch this film and you think about the training, you think about how the way that the world is set up for people to completely lose their personality, their individuality, to demean, degrade, to completely wipe them out, to just make them killing machines. That's the idea. And then when they're faced with this idea of what war actually is, um, they're still not prepared. Nothing can prepare you for the horrors of what's going to happen in a war. Like no one ever goes into a war and think, okay, I totally know what this is going to be about, and this is going to be awesome. I'm going to come back a hero, and this is going to be the greatest thing. They might go in thinking that, but once you're faced with those types of things, I believe that you can't help but be changed and kind of have to reassess who or what you are. And so that movie, talking with Matt, talking with Doug, we started talking about the second half as I went into it as the weaker half, the first half being the stronger half. And then talking through the two of them, we started kind of working out the second half as being something that is just as strong, if not stronger, because of the ways that we are face to face with humanity as individuals. They all may be wearing the same uniform, but it's in the second half in which their individuality starts to pull out, and you start to see their reaction to the horrors that they're faced with, and both this, male ego, which Kubrick is specializes in, this masculinity, um, this what men do. We talk quite a bit about how his films do not concern themselves with women's viewpoints about things or with women characters, because that's his concern is about the male perspective and the male journey. And so going through it again, we started realizing that, you know, it's a nightmare and none of it is real, because everything is fake. He's importing palm trees into England to make this battle scene. He's destroying a factory that he found, like I think it was a tire factory, to make it look like bombed out parts of a city. And everything has such a plasticity to it and is so unrealistic. It actually heightens this idea of what war is, because you don't go to these places that you're used to seeing. These places have been destroyed and decimated and changed irrevocably. And so having this world not be a real place and not existing in reality and just being this amalgamation of photo research and things he could import and what kind of works for it. Usually these would be things of a B movie, of like making it work for budgetary constraints, but he had whatever budget he wanted. He made these decisions very purposefully and thoughtfully, which adds to all these different layers of the emotional state of the characters and how nothing looks real because everything is filtered through this concept of your whole perception is being changed all the time. And so that's kind of how I came out of it afterwards, was just how much the second half of the film actually is valid and just as good as the first half of the film. It became something very different. It really kind of changed the way I looked at it. And I think I went back and watched it again right afterwards because that's how excited I was about the ideas and concepts we were talking about.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
No
And
problem.
I like that description of the structure that Kubrick seems to be employing generally throughout his films. And also, I like that point you make about the changing perspective to describe various aspects of, in particular, the so called second half, the second part, if you will, of Full Metal Jacket. That's really great because it reminds me too, because in particular, the second part of that seems also, and in line with what you're saying, seems also to be expressing or dealing with characters whose perspectives themselves are changing almost constantly, and not just their perspectives but also our perspectives of them, because characters are introduced and they could be quote unquote our heroes or our protagonists, but then we realize sometime along the way that they shift to a more nuanced and perhaps a darker part of the psyche, or their actions might be seem somewhat more morally ambiguous, to say the least. Then the opposite is true. We might have a character who may be introduced to us as being somewhat villainous or unlikable, but maybe there's some turn or change happens that could be quite the opposite. But then another change can happen, which will then upend our perspective and shift our focus back to our original assessment, which is on an antagonistic type of level. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely right. It just kind of shows the how no one can be just one thing. Like, and where he's blowing up these movie tropes of, you know, if you think about war films from the 50s and early 60s and 40s, everyone is a type. You have, the grunt, you have the guy from New York, you've got the guy who's has a sweetheart back home and he's going to show the picture and inevitably die in the fourth reel. You've got these character types, and he plays with these character types and completely blows them up on you, so you don't know where you stand with them, because they don't know where they stand with each other. They think, oh, this guy's great, I went to boot camp with him, and then we get to the company he keeps, and you're like, these people are animals. Like, but then they're also your brothers in arms at some point, because when things go crazy, they all go back to their training of having each other's back, even though in real life they might completely hate each other or be indifferent to each other. It's such a weird and unique relationship, and it really makes us feel that same way. I've been in situations where you're with a friend, but then you're with their friends or people they might know, and you're kind of stuck in this situation where you're like, I would never hang out with that person ever in life, but here I am in a car with this guy and I don't know, like, this is just strange. All your perceptions change, and I think that's where the second half of that film really kind of works it out. And then, you have that ending which just reverts them all back into children playing war again, which is where I came from at the beginning of my experience with the film, is as a kid playing war games. And then you get to the end of that movie and they're all singing that Mickey Mouse Club theme song and walking away from a whole town that's on fire, and you're just like, yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. These people are just playing war, and it's really amazing. And it's just, that's just one of the many conversations we've had. So it gets going, it gets good. That's what I love talking about it.
Oh, Travis, thank you so much for that. And it's, oh my goodness, it. I have a choice in my mind here. Should I ask the Full Metal Jacket follow up question, which I know would lead into a complete, or should I ask the question, the other question I have? So I'm struggling. So because I oh my goodness. Well, actually, I'm sorry. One last indulgence on Full Metal Jacket. I
Yeah,
apologize,
go.
but and then I'll go to my other question, which was, so the Full Metal Jacket question, which is, do you think that, well, you mentioned the two parts of the film. Where do you see, if at all, the way in which those two parts are consistent with each other, or where are the connections, if at all, between the two?
I think the running connection is its main character, Matthew Modine's Private Joker, because as a character, he doesn't he doesn't change much. It's a strange byline. He is our character, but he's also kind of a character that in real life you might think is a little too much, because of his constant need to make light of any situation that he's in. And so there is that cockiness of kind of being the smartest person in the room in which he feels he is. And it gets himself and others in trouble during the first half of the movie, and it gets himself and others out of trouble in the second half of the movie. So by him not really changing his core of who he is, a person who's going to question what is being presented to him at face value, and a person who is going to kind of keep pushing, even though he does have a side of him that is genuinely caring. The fact that he wears that peace button on his helmet, as part of his character. The fact that he, when everyone else kind of is shunning Lawrence, the Piles character, he's the one who kind of tries to help take him under his wing and set him straight. And then later when he goes into war, he's got his guy Rafter that he's kind of taking under his wing as well and kind of walking around. And then he still he still cares a bit. You could see he doesn't want to he doesn't want to lose himself in this situation. He wants to be an individual, yet there he is at the end blending in with everyone else as they walk off into the night. So I think it's his character that kind of keeps the first half to the second half tied together, because tonally they're completely different. The first half is super structured, super formal. The ways that the camera moves, the way that the composition is set up, everything has an order and a discipline to it. Whereas the second half, we start getting into everything being a little more open, wild, the camera being unsure of itself, the compositions getting looser, the camera work getting looser. So visually, we have two completely separate styles of filmmaking, with Matthew Modine's character being the through line, the anchor that kind of keeps us grounded in each film. So it's character for sure for that one.
Hmm. No, that's excellently stated, and that's so well stated as well, because it's the character, and in one situation versus another, which might be different but also might be very similar, but even those differences lead to perhaps seemingly different results, or maybe not so different when one thinks about them. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's really well said. And I love to. I'm so sorry about this. That
No,
that
please.
I love to. What you said reminded me that the film, the first half in particular, is often described as being showing us the dehumanizing aspects of the training, all the way down to the opening with the shaving of the hair. And I always had that view of the film, but in fact, there's this weird thing that happens upon a rewatch of that, for me anyway, which is there comes a point where even those moments of quote unquote dehumanization bring out something of the individual in this odd or maybe indirect way. It's almost like I am trying to find other ways to identify who this person is when we see a row of them. And it's that wonderful type of Kubrickian arrangement of shot, in terms
Hmm.
of balance and symmetry. But when you look closely, not everyone is the same height. There are a little bit of the way that maybe the head looks. There are certain bumps or shapes that make the individual appearance slightly different than the person next to you. And then the glasses or something, or the faces that we've come to know more as the film progresses, are protagonists, as it were. We get to see those little individualized, say, physical features. And then, of course, there are the internal characteristics that we come to know as well. And we can kind of get a sense or aura of that even when we just see them without hearing their dialogue. And so I find there's this weird way, and I mean this very complimentarily, there's this weird way that even these dehumanizing aspects have this paradoxical way of maybe bringing out other parts of the personality. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
that becomes very much apparent, in particular in the second half. And also there's this idea of change, and not just change just from one direction to the other, but change and back and forth. And we see that in the second half. We even see it in the first half with the Joker, our main character. He seems to be on one side, but maybe his action or lack of action in certain key moments might be suggestive of something else. And maybe there's yet something else. In other words,
Oh
there
yeah.
is this type of complexity and going back and forth and change and changing perspectives. It's certainly true for some of the characters. We see them at one point and then they end up somewhere quite different by the end of that particular part of the film. But I really love that. That's really great. Changing perspectives and then a through line of character that may or may not yield the same results. Yeah, well said.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a you bring up some very valid points. The idea that conformity inevitably breeds uh, anarchy, or not anarchy. It breeds individualism. The more you try to force people into a box, the more people try to break out of whatever box you're putting them into. And that's a good point about the visual thing. Like, we look at the symmetry of the shot and we see that it's lined up perfectly, but you do, upon looking deeper, which is your job as a person, to look deeper, never accept things for the surface value that it is, to look deeper in, and then you start to see that everyone there is different. And even in terms of the demoralizing of the people, the sergeant who Arlie Ermy, who is spending his time humiliating them by giving them all demeaning names, is also individualizing them through those courses of those names. They're stereotyped, and they're racist, or they're completely antagonistic, but in doing so, he is allowing them to be different at the same time. It's that whole concept of any type of institution that wants everyone to be the same. Like, you look at the you know, British rebellion movies of like school rebellions, look like something like If, by Lindsay Anderson, and you have all these kids who are all wearing the same uniforms and stuck in this school and these really restrictive environments, and of course that breeds rebellion, that breeds these people wanting to strike out and be individuals. Leads to that punk movement. This whole idea of that there's uh, institutions that want everyone to kind of force them into kind of these standards, which only kind of makes people want to break out of them even more and more. And that's a fantastic theme throughout so many films. This idea of breaking out of these shells, breaking out of these normative stereotypes, and trying to be something more. And that's where that's where most times that people who might not understand or might not realize why something doesn't work for them in film is because there isn't that idea of change. I mean, sometimes movies don't show you that people change, or the change is very, very incremental or small. But change does occur. But I think sometimes if characters are drawn too poorly without this idea of individual motive or expectations or dreams for themselves, they seem to fall flat and be something that is uninteresting, which therefore you're stuck with a plot. And really, I mean, there's only so many plots you can watch. It's always ends up coming back to kind of like character, which always feels to be super important to me.
Mm. That's again. Thank you so much for that, Travis. Thank you, thank you. This is a great indication of this style of discussion that you and Matt and your guests on your own podcast engage with on an episode by episode basis. So, once again, for anyone who is watching this and has not checked out the complete podcast that Travis does with our dear friend Matt, please check it out. I will leave the description box some links to the podcast. It's really wonderful. So it started out with
Thank
Kubrick,
you.
and then it went along to Elaine May, and it's continuing on at the moment as well. So um, thank you very much, Travis. And I want to thank you too, because you, in your earlier comments, you brought up this idea of uh, universality and intimacy in the cinema engagement experience. And also in that great example that you brought about Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, you did refer, I believe, to how you viewed it and how you had a certain, say, a perspective that was, of course, supported, and it was encouraged by the people around you. And also you had a perspective on that and other films based on your own experiences growing up as well. And so I'd like to ask you, based on that, which is Uh, the cinema journey, which I always mention, is very important. And I always find that the subjective experience of the cinema journey is actually essential. And part of that, or a main component of that, is one's, say, childhood or growing up with cinema, as it were. So, in that spirit, may I ask, Travis, what were for you some of those important stops along the way as you were growing up on your cinema journey? What were some of those important childhood memories of cinema?
So I guess to start, I would probably mention the first time I went to the movies. The first movie I ever saw in theaters, um, and the only movie I ever went to with my father. My parents weren't huge; they're not big movie people. You know, they're a sitcom TV type of family. They like the sitcoms and television, sports, huge sports family. I'm not a big sports person, um, but my father took me to go see E.T. when I was 5. Um, what I didn't know was that was because my sister was being born. I'm 5 years old. I don't always know what's going on, and so my mom went into labor and went to the hospital, and my dad took me to a movie to get me to a point where he could then go drop me off at my grandmother's house because my grandparents weren't home at that moment. This is the story I found out later in life. So the first movie I ever saw in theaters was E.T. We had a 4-screen cinema in my hometown in Brunswick, Maine, and for some reason, instead of taking me the normal way to where the movie theater was, he took me a weird behind like it was next to the strip mall, and he took me behind the strip mall to it, and it was like this big surprise, a big reveal. We come around this corner and there's the movie theater, which I've never been to, but we see all the time because it's in our town. And so we went to see ET, and I had never seen that, so I remember being like scared and nervous and excited and elated, and I bawled my eyes out in that movie as everything goes wrong for the kid and ET's dying because as our child connects, as the kid Elliot connects with ET in that film. Myself as a 5-year-old is also connecting with ET in that film as a viewer. And this is before I knew who Steven Spielberg was or anything. This was the first movie I saw, and it informed a lot. And more importantly, the second movie I saw in theaters was E.T. A couple weeks later, a friend invited me to go see E.T. with them. And so I don't think I would have started understanding that I'm allowed to go see movies repeatedly in theaters unless that happened. There's that idea like, well, you saw it, so why do you need to see it again? Well, you see it again because you get more out of it every viewing experience. Like, you change, it changes, your relationship with it changes, your viewing experience with it changes. And so by having my second movie be the same movie I saw in theaters, it informed me that this is something that is okay, allowable, and enjoyable. Because my first experience was with my father, which was its own experience, and then I got to see a movie with a friend, which was a completely different experience. So much, there was a different relationship to the film. So it was super amazing. And from there on out, it was I didn't go to the theater a lot until I was probably in junior high school or middle school here, which is somewhere around between 10 and 12 years old, 10 and 13 years old. And then we started going as friends to go see movies, and that's when I was introduced to the movie Pet Cemetery. A bunch of friends, I think we're 11, 12 at the time, we dare each other to go see this scary movie. And so the group of us all went together, and I fled the theater at, at the part where we learn about the mom's backstory of her sister with multiple sclerosis, and her name's Zelda. That scene terrified me. I ran out of that theater completely petrified, waiting until that scene was over, waiting until the sound of her was gone to re-enter the theater, pretending with a brag a you know a swagger and a bragness like, oh, I was just going to the bathroom, totally covering up for my terror. And that was one of those experiences that it was so fun later in life to realize that so many other people had the same exact experience with that character in that film. Um, but the other big aspect was watching movies at my grandparents' house. My grandparents had HBO, and my mom worked at their house. My mom and my grandmother had a hairdressing salon together. It was attached to my grandparents' house, and so I would spend many afternoon there on my own watching TV. And so that's when I also started watching the same movies over and over again. At that time, Star Wars was on HBO all the time. I'd watch that 100 times. And my mom would always walk in at the cantina scene and say, "What the hell are you watching? I don't understand what any of this is." And she would leave. And I think that it was those interactions which made me realize that not everything is for everyone, and that it's okay to still like something that you like even though others might not like it, which helped me form my opinions of movies in a way that I can understand that some people aren't going to like the things I like. I'm not going to like some of the things they like, but that doesn't mean that I need to uh, make their opinions less valid or make them feel bad about what they do or do not like. I think that's a big thing in the film community, is this idea of, oh, how could you like that? Or, ugh, that movie's not very good. How can that be something that you enjoyed watching? I find value in almost every film I see. I can't help but not. Um, so lots of TV. My grandfather showed me parts from The Godfather 2 at that point in my life. That was also on HBO a lot, and that was my first contact with subtitles. Um, because when we were kids, we used to walk down to in school. I went to St. John's Element. I went to a Catholic school, and they would walk us from the Catholic school to the public library, and we would watch on 16 millimeter projector The Red Balloon. They would show us that. I think I saw that movie probably 6 times. That's a Janus film. That's in a subsidiary of the Criterion Collection. It is something that they have put out, but not under their label. And we watched that probably once every couple of years, and I don't think I realized it was in French until I was older. I always just remember what it was and what the story was. And I think it wasn't until I was older that I started realizing that, there's a whole world of cinema outside of American films, and that kind of helped lead me into seeking out more and more movies from around the world, which eventually led me to Akira Kurosawa. That was my first big entry into Japanese cinema. That was great to kind of get into. I was very sick at the time. I had a I was staying at a friend's house and I was very sick, and so they kind of left me to my own devices because we were on a family vacation, and this person I was staying with, their dad just had all of the Akira Kurosawa VHS tapes, and so I just started putting them in and watching them randomly because it wasn't a lot to watch. I don't know how this person had so many VHS tapes of Kurosawa. They were all the old Janus VHS tapes of that and Kino, and um so I watched Seven Samurai, Rashomon, uh Bad Sleep Well, and what was that? I watched the fourth one in there. I want to say it must have been Sanjuro, because I saw Sanjuro before I saw Yojimbo, and it was absolutely fantastic seeing these Japanese films that were made uh, with a Western eye, like his love of kind of the American Western films and how he imbued them into his Japanese chambra films, those samurai epics. Uh, it opened up my eyes to kind of experiencing other things, and I just spend my time kind of digging because that's when video stores started becoming very popular. And in my hometown, we had one called Matt and Dave's Video Explosion, I think was the name of the store. And they had everything. They had that wall of staff picks, and you go through, you start finding someone with someone of your taste, you start going through those. They had whole directors series, they had, cult sections. You just start kind of picking your way through every day. I had worked at a pizza shop when I was a teenager, and I would bring them free pizza and they would give me free movies. That was kind of the trade off. And so that way I was able to get more movies than I normally would have. And I would just work my way through the new release wall, seeing everything I could. I was just at that age of just devouring movies, because you could watch movies all day, then go out all night with your friends, then come back home, sleep, go to work, watch movies. Like that's all I did. And then I started getting the idea to I had to possess them at that point. For some reason, at that point, like there was an idea of possessing films, and so I joined Columbia House, and you could get there was this mail order catalog where you could pick out movies and buy them for VHS, and they always had a deal where you could kind of get like 5 movies for a penny a piece, and then you had to buy like a movie at full price later down the line. And so with that, they also had a program where you could invite a friend to join. They would get 5 movies for a penny a piece, and you would get 2 movies for a penny a piece, as for signing them up. So before you knew it, I was running this small mail fraud scheme out of my house where I had 10 people living there, all members of Columbia House, and I was just accruing, hundreds of VHS tapes of all these movies. So I was just like everything, like I would get whole director's series as much as I could. Uh, my whole Bruce Lee collection was from there, and I was just like picking up all these movies, anything that struck my fancy, because it gets to a certain point where you have everything in the catalog. Well, let's start getting these movies from other countries. Let's start getting these weird animated movies. Let's start getting this anime. It was uh it was super fun, and I just have these movies coming into my house, and uh it was so enjoyable because that's when my collecting bug started. And as you can see behind me, I've got my Criterions behind me. I have a whole basement full of movies, shelves and shelves of films that I still collect to this day. And it's that idea of now I have something that I can watch repeatedly over and over again at my will. And the next biggest thing is being able to help others discover films that same way. You can tell someone, yeah, you should go rent this movie, but putting a physically something in someone's hands and saying, this means something to me, see if it means something to you, is super rewarding sometimes, and it really helps you connect with people. It always comes back to connecting with others. That's what all this does. So my cinematic journey is all over the place. There is no line. I will say one other thing. right before i went to right before I graduated from high school, I saw the movie Natural Born Killers. That was the movie that came out. Oliver Stone. Strangely enough, that was the movie that made me realize that movies can mean so much more than what the story is. For the longest time, story was the only thing I kind of was looking at, action and set pieces and stuff like that. And it wasn't until that movie which I realized that there can be so many more layers to everything. And it kind of opened my eyes to how you can tell stories in unique and different ways and have them mean more than just what's on the surface. And so that was a crazy experience for me, because that was the time where Natural Born Killers, Pulp Fiction, there's a lot of these movies that kind of changed the way a lot of movies were seen at the time. And all that did was just blow open the doors to me being able to see so much more cinema, because then you start looking at what is referencing those movies or what movies inspired those people, which gets you deeper and deeper. And then all of a sudden one day you realize there's 40 years of films that I've never seen, uh, that I need to start finding and looking at to start building my base and my history of films, which led me to deciding to go to film school. And I went to film school for script writing, and I was the only script writer in the program, so they canceled my program. And I ended up going. They said, "Well, you could go to the director's program, or you can go to the cinematography program." And I said, "Well, how many people are in the director's program?" They're like 20. I go, "How about cinematography?" There's 3. I'll go to the cinematography program, so that one can stay alive. And it was great. It was a conservatory. It wasn't a 4-year school. It's at the time it was called the International Film and Television Workshops in Rockport, Maine, but now it's called Maine Media Workshops. They're still open to this day. They still teach classes. I've taught there for 15 years. I teach film lighting classes there, because that's what I ended up going into the career as. So I do lighting for film and television, and that's where I turned the thing that brought me so much joy, the thing that has entertained me, the thing that has kept me company, the thing that has educated me for so many years, also moved me into something that has provided for my family, given me work experience, and I've made it part of my life. It's almost now totally encompassing, from my pastime and my hobby to what I actually do for a work. It's all the same thing. So it's taken over in positive ways and in negative ways my life completely.
Bravo. That's great. Yeah, I'm where to begin. This is absolutely splendid. Um, let's see. Well, I suppose before I forget, let me say that in your wonderful description of your own, say, cinema journey beginnings, I think that was so lovely about the story of E.T. and the circumstances around that. Well, that's really fascinating. And also, you mentioned the film Pet Cemetery. I will say also, and I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but let me say, you've seen the film, obviously.
Oh,
So let me
yes.
say that when I was a kid and I saw that, afterwards, there's this thing about Jaws, the film Jaws makes you scared to swim in the
Oh,
water or
yes.
something like that. Pet Cemetery, when I saw Pet Cemetery, I was scared. It wasn't the water, it was standing next to beds. I couldn't stand next, yeah, yeah. I,
Oh,
I
yeah.
was
Oh, yeah.
just I gotta look, I gotta keep my distance and just try my best to check, right? You know what I mean? So
Oh,
I was
completely.
just, yeah, so I was,
It
that freaked me out. I was, yeah.
that movie made me scared of my own children.
My goodness, it is effective. That one.
Oh,
Oh,
completely. There's so many
yeah.
effective things. That movie helped stoke my love of horror movies. That's one of the things that I realized, that I don't have a specific genre or specialty that I like. I just like a lot of things. And horror movies, man. I'm huge fan of those. Like, I have a deep bench of horror movies that I love, and that's one of those movies. That and waking up after falling asleep on a couch watching a movie that I was babysitting for my sisters. They were upstairs sleeping, and I was babysitting, so I got to stay up downstairs and watch TV. And my parents were out for some dinner dance thing that they were at some club, uh, and I fell asleep watching some movie. Woke up in the middle of The Exorcist, and just completely to wake up to hear little Reagan possessed by the devil, screaming on the bed these horrible, horrible things and vomiting her pea soup on the priests. And I just woke up to that, and it has scarred me for life. I still have like a fear of vomiting. Like it is all encompassing. I can't even begin to tell you how much these images have stayed with me for so long. And like you said, fear of being next to a bed, I'm always scared of that, having my Achilles tendon cut. When I had children and one would like in the middle of the night wake up and run into your room because something's wrong or they had a nightmare, my first reaction was always to be like, "What do you want?" And like trying to keep them away from me in case they're possessed and they want to kill me. I don't know. It's the middle of the night. I'm also just waking up. There's many fun stories of my children telling me about how I'd wake up and put my foot up in the air and try to hold them away with my foot because I don't know what they want yet. Yeah, it's affecting. Lots of movies are very affecting. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's amazing how those moments stick with you even
Completely.
after having seen what many years since. So it's that's just you see something as a kid and it's still with you, and so that's really that's remarkable, really. And you mentioned, what was it, Matt and Dave's video
Video.
explosion
Oh, Matt and Dave's video venture. That's what
venture?
it was.
Okay, Matt and
Video
Dave's
venture.
video venture. Okay, so that's another very important aspect for me and for a lot of people, the video rental store experience. And also,
Oh yeah.
speaking of which, you also mentioned the catalog and mailing in for VHS tapes. I did that too with
Yeah.
it was CBS Fox, I think, for
Oh
me,
yeah.
and that's how we got the Star Wars films on VHS, like Aliens. I think some
Mm-hmm.
of the Bruce Lee films as well.
Oh yeah.
They I think so.
Yeah, Columbia House was they had the CBS Fox stuff as well, and that was I got all those movies that same exact way.
Okay, and it probably was it the VHS with Bruce Lee, and he was standing, and it was just like a black background.
Yeah, when you put the spines
Yeah,
together,
yeah,
it
yeah,
had
yeah,
the dragon image. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So already
Ugh.
the collecting bug was there, it was
Oh
built
yeah.
in. Yeah.
The ephemera of having a tactile physical thing and the package design, all that stuff was
Yeah.
built in from youth, you know.
I don't know about you. I was always fascinated, on the backs of those VHS tapes, the covers. It would just be the slide thing, right? It wouldn't be any of this open clamshell or
Uh-huh.
anything. But on the backs, they'd have, I think, especially on those Fox VHSs, they'd have the backs, and then they had the little blurb on the
Mm-hmm.
bottom part. But on the top, they'd have maybe two pictures from the
Yes.
films, and I'd always look at the backs of the box first before I watched the film to see what it was about. And when I put the tape in, I don't know, I'd always, oh yeah, that's the bit where
That's the
that's the shot,
scene.
yeah, in the on the back of the
Oh
VHS
yeah.
box. So
Oh yeah, and venturing as you know, when you're younger, venturing in the sections you really shouldn't be in, and like looking at like horror movies or action movies, R-rated movies, and like you flip it over and you're just like it's like they said when there was certain when the Hays Code was in place and there's certain restrictions upon directors on what they could show. uh the audience's mind does most of the work for you, so you don't even have to show that stuff. And these boxes were just these mysteries of imagination of what they could possibly be based on those two single pictures and then a cover, which a lot of times was, especially in the 80s, a completely misleading cover art for what was actually in the movie. And your mind was just completely fascinated and being working its imagination to its to the max, trying to piece together and make the story of what these movies are, to the point so that later in life you watch these movies and you're a little disappointed that they're not as they didn't live up to the expectations you had for them. So it was such a fun time. It's hard to kind of see that now with modern streaming, they don't have that same excitement of covers and little pictures and stuff like that. But some streaming sites try. There are some good artwork that they put in, but it's a totally different experience.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's really amazing to think also just how that whole environment of home media consumption has really evolved and changed over a relatively short period of time as well. So
Mm.
and that's also something that is that the history of that is still being written, as you I think
Oh,
very
completely.
well describe in terms of our current age. So we shall see what the coming years bring. And
As my son said, you're going to be in the movie, Dad. Like you're going to watch movies, but you're going to be in them as a character
mm,
in your mind.
yeah.
He's 10. And I'm like, you know what? You're probably not that far off, kid.
What was that? The Truman Show?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So that's wow. But wow, that's really wonderful. But also that another thing, which is so wonderful, of the many wonderful things that you've spoken of so far. This is great, by the way. But one of those wonderful things is also your experiences, right, in terms of the craft of filmmaking. And you
Mm,
mentioned film school and lighting, and you took the cinematography track, and
yeah.
so uh, and how it is now part of what you do even now. And so I think what I'd like to ask is, uh, for those of us, myself included, who did not go to film school, could you let us know, first of all, what is the film school experience like? Or what was it like for you in terms of what were you expected to read, what were you expected to study up on, what were you doing in what were the types of classes that you were engaged in, and other things of that nature. Could you give us a little bit of what your film school experience was like?
Yeah. So like I said, I decided to go there to be a screenwriter, but that class wasn't there. But um, the film school I went to, it was like a conservatory, so it wasn't a part of a 4 year university. It wasn't like kind of like UCLA or NYU, where you go to college, then you also have like 2 years of their film program. Uh, it was just an art school, so I think the only non-art class I had in the 2 years I went to that school was an anthropology course. And even then, they hired a teacher who knew we were a bunch of art students who had no interest in anything but art. So he geared the class towards us to make creative use of, ethnographic studies. So, we had to go and we made movies in cemeteries and studied history of people or took photos of gravestones. We did this whole project, but um it was geared towards art minded people that may not have. I didn't have the best high school experience. I wasn't a very good student. I found that uh, the way I was most easily engaged was with the things I was most interested in. I could memorize the names of every person in a film, and tell you the other 30 films they were in, but I couldn't tell you anything about certain world history. I've grown and changed over the years, but I just really wasn't a very good student in my youth. Um, so this art school was fantastic in terms of it just kind of focused me on the thing I wanted to do, which was make movies. And so we had classes kind of like we had a class on kind of psychology and symbols. So we talked about Jungian psychology. We talked about dreams and symbols and what their meanings were. We had a writing class that was all about folklore and fables and creation myths. So we focus mainly on that, the hero's journey. Talked a lot of Joseph Campbell um, type stuff. We had an art and visual issues class where we kind of went through more modern art and modern art movements and looked at what they were trying to say and what they were trying to do, whether they were successful in their approaches, and this idea of how art has changed throughout the years. With cinema being such a modern art, newer art, it hasn't gone through all the evolutions of, say, photography or painting or sculpture. So I think there's still so much room for cinema to grow because it's so young still. It hasn't gone through a lot of its steps. A lot of people cry and complain about remakes and this ripping off that. And at this point in photography and art, like everyone knows that there's nothing original and everything is a reference to something else. So you have to kind of accept that as an artist and draw from it and make it your own. Whereas film, everyone is still trying to make the next new cool thing that no one has ever seen. And pretty soon we're going to get to a point where there is going to be nothing, no, it just has to be done. So we did a lot of that kind of study. We did like media studies, which we learned about commercials and about how the media creates these ideas of good guys and bad guys and slanting and making these making stories that uh, pertain to one specific type of people and how it kind of negates other voices and other opinions. We had art history classes, film history classes, and then we had the physical classes, which was we did black and white darkroom photography classes. So we had to learn how to compose and compose pictures well, how to get good exposure on them, all before we picked up a video camera. We had editing classes where we had to learn how to get the most out of a story. What the difference between one or two frames can really tell about a tale. How that can really change pacing and it was just, and it was super intensive. We didn't have holidays. We weren't on the same school schedule as everyone else. We did 3 months on, 3 months off, 3 months on, 3 months off, no break. We even had school on the weekends. That's when we did all our projects and stuff like that. And the school was very small. There was, I think I said earlier, I think it was 25 kids in my class. um, I didn't go to college until I was like 23. So it took me a while to get there to understanding what I wanted to do in life. And because of that, when I knew, I was very much laser focused on getting what I wanted to do and doing it right. Lighting classes, I think this is where this part of schooling, the history was great, getting to learn about a lot of films and movements and stuff like that I kind of didn't know about. um the whole 70s rebel period where everyone was making anti-films, like all Robert Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller making the anti-western, seeing the French New Wave kind of stuff with Breathless. Those are all great building blocks that I really did appreciate and enjoy, and it helped me expand so much. But the thing that really got me appreciating film more was my lighting classes, and cinematography classes, because it's through those things we would dissect films based on kind of camera movements or light movements. Um, and that's when I started to realize that, like, uh, Natural Born Killers did, where it made me realize that there's more to a film than just a story. Having these cinematography classes made me realize that the visuals of the story are almost more important most of the times than the actual uh, the plot of the film or the words of a film. Because if you have these wonderful words and wonderful characters but everything looks horrible, it's not framed correctly, it has no visual style, the camera is stagnant or doesn't move or doesn't compose an image well, or the color palette is just completely wrong, it it doesn't support the story. Your visuals need to support everything that the story is trying to do. It's a beautiful dance. It's a tango. You have your cerebral side of words, what is it, all your surface ideas, and then you have your visuals, which are your you have your subtext and your text. The visuals are your subtext. Your text is what is there. And by putting these two things together, and they start dancing really well, and they get to be really great partners, stories can elevate past what their original concepts are. And learning about color theory and learning about lighting theories, about where you put a light can completely change the way you feel about a character and how it creates mood and texture. Uh, um, there's a whole like section we did on just kind of uh putting the light different places to kind of to show, like, you have a low light, it makes people feel monstrous. You have a top light, it makes people feel like they're under interrogation or not to be trusted. A backlight creates this beatific halo, which creates this idea that this person is angelic. Front light is flat but beautifying. Where you have a side light, it creates depth and character to a face. Sculpting with light, the idea of like Leonardo da Vinci's chiaroscuro, where you're using light you're painting with blackness as opposed to the light parts, which inevitably leads to things like black and white photography, where that's when I started really falling in love with black and white cinematography, because our teachers are showing this. Because the easiest way to show lighting is to show it without color, is to just show lighting. And so that's a good stepping stone. And then as you start growing, and as color film started growing, you started learning how light and color start working together to tell a story. And it was absolutely fantastic. Reading wise, we had lots of articles to read, but we never really had a book that we focused on. It was all about the actual experience, getting your hands dirty and getting in there. We didn't do a lot of theory. Everything was a lot of practice. So we wrote about the things that we were learning about. We did sculpture to learn about 3D. We did, our media studies person would tell us about this and then assign us to go out and make it ourselves. So everything was in a practical sense, learning how to use the equipment to tell the stories the way they wanted to. And because of that, I absorbed it better. And it wasn't until later, when I was asked if I would like to teach a class there, that I realized how much I had absorbed. This is the first time I kind of experienced that my education was beneficial to others, which was a huge revelation to me, that things that I am learning can be passed on to others, that it validates what I know by being able to teach it. Then all of a sudden I understand it better because I have to explain it to someone else, which inevitably led me to talking movies and talking about them, in podcast form or with friends. Or it helped me grow and change in that whole other way. And so film school was really great. I still work in the industry, I still do lighting, and because of that, I have a deeper appreciation for a lot of films, because not only am I looking at them aesthetically or structurally or thematically, but I'm also looking at them in terms of the craft, what it takes to be able to do the things that they're doing, because I have to do them myself in real life. So it adds another layer and complexity to how I view movies. There's not a time where I don't watch a night exterior scene in a movie and wince and be like, oh, that must have sucked to be on that set that day. Because that is a huge setup. That's got to be hundreds of people running around crazy, lighting city block after city block. The whole conducting of that scene must have been so complex for such a small amount of time on camera, that I appreciate those films in a different way that way as well.
No, thank you very much for this, because especially for myself, I'm not a cinematographer and I don't have this background or expertise. And so I can, I mean, I admit I can kind of see the general flow
Mm-hmm.
in a film discussion, for example, in terms of a way that maybe a character is pronounced in a scene, for example, or the background, or maybe a quirk of a very peculiar type of lens. And the phrase, what is it? Deep focus is often used
Oh
even
yeah.
in general descriptive terms. But
Mm-hmm.
for instance, if I were to use it, I don't use it as a cinematography expert necessarily. So I don't have those I don't have that base knowledge. And so I think if I could ask, uh, maybe for someone like myself who doesn't have that knowledge specifically, could you give me an example from a film or a shot or a certain cinematographer's work, for example? Could you give me an example of what would maybe what is a particular scene or moment or setup that you found particularly impressive and from a cinematographer perspective, and why that is the case for you, why you feel that way? Could you give us some examples of that?
Yeah, I think so. When I teach lighting classes, one of the big things is making sure you have examples to show to kind of discuss the way things work and discuss how things happen, and to inspire the students to try new things. I always try to find different things that they might not have seen before to kind of talk about the art of cinematography. So the three that I think stand out the most that has students comprehend the power of what the camera can do. Uh, One of them is from it's Vittorio Storaro, and he's a cinematographer, and it's from the movie Apocalypse Now. And when most people show that movie or talk about that movie, it's either the Martin Sheen scene at the beginning where he's naked and doing Tai Chi in front of a mirror, or they're talking about the later Marlon Brando stuff with that light by the window. But the scene that I always show to my students is the one where Martin Sheen and his PT boat of characters has showed up to part of a battle zone. It's a bridge that they've been both sides have been fighting over forever, and he needs to find the person in charge so they can get their papers signed so they can then go on to the next part of their journey. And this is the moment in the film where we're seeing what the chaos of war is. We've seen kind of like the operatic sense where we have the choppers storming the beach, so his characters can surf. But this is the scene where he has to walk through this battle area to try to find a character, and Vittorio Storaro is showing this by he's mostly a close up on his characters' faces. Usually, when you're in a war scene like this, you'd be grand, you'd be going epic and seeing everything going on. He has that shot, but everything is just light and color. So you have these like kind of Christmas lights that are hanging from this bridge, these balls of light. You've got a search tower light that's sweeping. The Christmas lights are yellow, the search tower is blue. You've got flares going up in the air, both as white and red, as people are firing dirt and flares so they can see different parts of the battle. You've got the staccato of gunfire happening at the same time, which also is creating these orange bursts. And then you have the general ambient nighttime moonlight. Have you? Storaro is known for his very intense, expressive colors. And so we have all this happening, and it happens in a wide, but then we spend the rest of the scene close up on Martin Sheen as he's trying to find someone in all this chaos. And you see on his face, it's camera pointing at him staring directly at camera, walking towards camera, camera's leading him, and you just watching the searchlight go by his head, the color go up of red from a flare, the staccato of gunfire flash in his face. He walks past this one section of the foxhole where there's some light strung up so the warmth goes by. And it's walking through hell. It's chaos and hell and darkness. It's a nightmare. And all this is done visually. For all we know, this was in a studio somewhere with two dirt mound walls 30 feet wide. I mean, 30 feet long, because we never see him in the space. We only see his face. And so it's this dance of color and sound and music and this dance of color and shape of color. shadows as he's walking through trying to find someone in charge, where we realize that, that's the whole point of this, is no one's in charge. Everyone is left to their own devices. Everyone is by themselves in this war. And it's all done visually. And that part always brings the students to an understanding of how much complexity there can be in a single shot. We think of photography as one thing happening, a single image. We talk about how every frame a painting. There's a great a videographer that makes these fantastic dissections of work. And it can be a painting, but it also is movement, and having this play of color and light and shadow and movement throughout the scene, it completely changes the way that you view this. Another and in the hands of another cinematographer, they might have done it a completely different way. When we look at something like Ingmar Bergman's Persona, that's Sven Nykvist. There's this scene where Alma is still in the hospital, and it's after she has seen the television where she sees all this horrific imagery, and she lays down. She has the radio on next to her bed, and the radio, it's an older radio, so when you turn it on, a light emits from it, so it kind of glows in her face. And when she lays down in bed, it's a certain time of day. And to show how stagnant she is and how unmoving she is and how she's in this deep state of psychosis where she cannot escape from it, um, they do a visual change of lighting. So we start with the scene where it seems like there's daylight coming in through the window, and throughout the course of the shot, the sun goes down within the same shot. So a passage of time happens. It's not a realistic passage of time. It's not the amount of actual time that's there. But in this one single shot, without the camera moving, with only two light sources in the room, we have this whole sense of she is there for a long period of time due to the way that the light is moving through the room. We get that sense of time passing and stagnation and stillness of her character, and how unwilling she is to come out of that hole, come out of that funk. And it's all with just two lights. It's absolutely stunning, and it totally changes how you feel about the story, and also adds, which is another element your lighting can tell you, it's this sense of magic to the film. We think about that story. There's all these fantastical elements within the story about these two women's personas merging together, and there's this mystery that's happening there. And by having these lighting tricks or these little camera moves that really kind of visually let you know what kind of world you're in, so it helps you get enveloped by the story and by the atmosphere, and that's all done visually. So I would say those are the two that I always go back to time and time again. And then the other movie, I always screen the entirety of two movies. I always screen the entirety of Night of the Hunter for its visuals, and I screen the entirety of All That Heaven Allows by Douglas Sirk for its visuals, because that movie is such a bold and fantastic use of color, that and color tied to emotion, that a lot of people don't think about that when they're thinking about older movies, about how vibrant they can be in terms of telling a story color wise, and emotions are tied to that movie's color palette extremely well. So that's the other hard thing when you're teaching about cinematography, is you have to teach the exaggerated um, color and lighting examples. You have to go to the extremes to kind of really show, because there's a whole range of movies in between where everything is naturalistic and simplistic and beautiful, and it takes so much technique and talent to be able to have that happen without it being showy or overdone. I think of things like Breaking the Waves. I think of things like Terrence Malick's movies with Chivo, the way that everything is simple, but it takes so much confidence of a cinematographer, expression, an eye, they always call it. I highly recommend that if anyone wants to kind of get a better understanding of cinematography, there's this fantastic documentary. It's hard to find. It's called Visions of Light, in which they just interview cinematographer after cinematographer, and they talk about who influenced them, what movies influenced them, and then they talk to the cinematographers of those movies, and then those people talk about their influences, and they go back and back with tons of examples, tons of visual cues. They talk about how you know, how these simple changes and simple ideas, how they were inventing things constantly to try to be able to get the visuals out of their head onto the screen. And it's an absolutely beautiful documentary. I highly recommend it to anyone who is interested in kind of just getting a better idea of cinematography.
Mm. Thank you very much for that excellent description and analysis. I'm uh, yeah, this is very much, this is like my own film school class I'm taking, and you're my teacher. I feel like I'm getting a special class for me. So thank you very much for this, because no, this is very important for me, because um which is, I think, I don't know how, if maybe what I'm about to say might be something you agree or disagree with. I'm not sure, but I know there are many types of expression in terms of camera and lighting, camera movement, camera type, lens usage,
Mm-hmm.
types of light, position of light, number of light, and the application of various ways in which the light is, I don't know what's the phrase, directed
Yep.
or honed or
Diffused or
diffused. Thank you.
bounced or
Yes.
yep.
So based on all these different variables that are all
Mm-hmm.
adjusted for a given shot, and even changed within a shot, I understand, as the
Oh
character
yeah.
moves or something, right? So I understand that these all have, like, each point requires a decision, and each
Mm-hmm.
decision requires some kind of analysis. What is it we want to achieve, and why do we want to achieve it, and thus how do we achieve it? And then
Yeah.
all those little points need to create one, say, shot within a moving
Yeah.
film, right?
Yeah. And then
And
when you add on top of that wardrobe and hair and set and props and uh, set decoration and all these things are the visual elements that the director of photography is working in concert with the director on. You start adding like layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of decisions, and that's what we end up with, which could have just been a scene where all we talk about is these two characters having a quick conversation and how wonderful that was. There was 500 decisions that were made just for that one shot, and that's one of 200 shots for a movie. It gets quite staggering when you start thinking about that, the process.
it brings to the attention of people, obviously, it of course brings light to, right, the
Mm-hmm.
role of the cinematographer and his or her crew, and
Yeah.
also the crew that is not just assisting the choices, but also maybe making the choices to a certain
Mm-hmm.
degree, due to, say, certain situations or circumstances that appear on the day, on the set, as it were. And
Oh
you
yeah.
mentioned, for example, the when you watch a night scene in a film, you think, oh my goodness, that would have been a tough day at the office.
Yeah.
Could you explain exactly what you mean by that? Like, what is the
Mm-hmm.
actual, what kind of work goes into, say, lighting a night scene? Like, what
it
is the total
it
involvement
is
of that, right?
uh it is it is totality in a night scene, because everything, the only way you're going to film anything at night is with light. So everything needs to be lit somehow. And there's a difference between dark and what we call movie dark. movie dark is not dark because something is lit. There's always something there that we can see. We can see our actors' faces. We could see trees, like if we're in a forest. Every night in a movie night, there's a moon somewhere that is perfectly placed, backlighting our characters or side lighting their faces. Uh, Firelight lights everything perfectly. It's it's a every night scene is a fantasy, which is a crazy idea because it's all orchestrated. So take for example, let's see, what's a recent film that I've seen. Take for example John Wick Chapter 3. I don't know if you've seen that movie. If anyone is into the John Wick franchise, this is the most recent example I can think of that's easiest to talk about with a night scene. um, there's a scene where we have a car that's pulling up to the hotel where all the assassins go to meet. It's the neutral zone for all these people. And you look at the scene like that, and there's probably about, you know, 40 to 50 lights in play just for that scene, not including all the practical lights that exist within this section of New York. There's lights on top of buildings, which are back raking the buildings so you can see and have separation between the buildings. There's tubes of light that are placed at the stairs and next to doors to add a whole level of slickness to what like we're visually seeing in the scene. There's bounce light on the ground. So when our character steps out of the vehicle, they're stepping into nice light, and then they walk through colored light to get to the door of this building, which is lit red because that's danger. So we have them walking into this hotel. Um, Everything. So, for instance, I guess let's talk about. I worked on the TV series Castle Rock. We did 2 seasons of Castle Rock. Anytime we did night lighting in the woods, we had these lifts. They're called condors. We see them usually on construction sites. They're bringing people up in the air to work on the sides of buildings. We have these lifts, and in each lift are 18,000-watt light bulbs called 18Ks that are lighting the forest. So when we look at our character in the woods, the lights have to be so big and powerful because they have to spread out. We can't compete ever with the sun. The sun is the brightest thing in the world. We see everything with the sun. That's our daylight. So at nighttime, we have to recreate the moon. What is the moon? The moon is a giant reflection of the sun. That's what our moonlight is. It's the sun bouncing off the moon and reflecting light back at us. So it's a giant reflector, is what the moon is. So when we're doing light at night, we're thinking about what the moon is doing. And if you have a light that's super far away, it creates strong shadows. The closer you are to a light source, the more diffuse your shadows are. So we need to have strong lights in the air to create moonlight. But we also need our actors to be able to be seen. So we're also having soft light around their faces. So when we did this scene in Castle Rock, we had 3 lifts with two 18Ks per lift. So no matter where we looked at which character, they were always in a backlight. We hung these 4 foot wide balls made of fabric with 2,000-watt lights in them in the trees all around this set. So when they walked into these sections, they had nice soft top light to feel like it's light diffusing through the trees above them. And then when they walked into any certain scene or any certain shot where they had to have conversation, we always had a very low level light off to their edge to create eye light so we can see their eyes. Your eyes are your most expressive thing. We need to be able to see them. Some of the best movies in the world manipulate eye light in terms of how we then understand a character. I always think John Carpenter's The Thing, where there's one character that never has eye light in their eyes because that's the person that is possessed by the alien at that moment. And everyone else always has a twinkle except for the person that's not possessed. It's super subtle, it's super hidden, but once you start seeing it, you can never unsee it again. So lighting, night lighting is just full of just small and big units that we have to see everything. And that's how you can tell the difference between the budgets on a film. If you have a small budget, you can't afford a huge lighting package. So everything is reduced. So shot sizes get smaller. The amount we can see in the world becomes diminished. Whereas a larger budget, you can afford more light. So now you're talking once upon a time in Hollywood where Brad Pitt is driving down the highway and he's passing through these pools of light. Those pools of light aren't street lights that happen to be there. They're lighting lifts with giant lights, soft lights hanging above the highway. So every time he passes through one, he has this nice, big, wide, same colored as every other light that he's passing underneath. So we can have an exposure that is pleasant to the eye and continues with the idea of the story. So it gets super complicated. It's it's fascinating. It's super tough. But anytime you need to see, you need to carve things out of the background. So, but you also don't want everything to be lit, because if everything's lit, there's no depth. So you need to have something way back in the background lit so you can see that something is far away, and then maybe something mid ground, but leave shadow between the two. So that gives you a sense of depth, with pictorial depth within the screen. Um, and so you have to think about all these things while you're thinking about also lighting your actor, what you want and don't want to see. And then you start thinking about color. What color is your moon? That's a huge thing for DPs. DPs all want to have their own version of what night is. Some people like blue, some people like white, some people like different colors. Everyone has a different idea, and that's the visual style of each director of photography, of what when they close their eyes, what they envision what night looks like to them, what they envision what sunset looks like to them. And so then it's up to a gaffer um, to take those artistic ideas and expressions and turn them into uh, a physical electronic device to create that thing. So a director of photography might like, I want a warm golden light coming in through this classroom window, backlighting our character who is, it's a memory of when he was in school and he had this moment where he connected with his teacher. So I want this to feel magical and warm and inviting. So I want this golden light. A gaffer then turns around and says, okay, to get this golden light and to make it feel the way that he's talking about or she's talking about, I'm going to need to have this type of light with this kind of color combination on it to create that kind of sense. And then they go to the DP and they say, we want to look at this. And we do tests to see if that color works with the film stock they're using. It becomes this whole complicated dance of things. And sometimes there's an experiment and we try things. Sometimes it's not. Um, but a gaffer is the one who takes that idea and turns it into the mechanical, because it's through the mechanical process, like the labor portion, that we can help the artistic side achieve what they want to do. And that's kind of like the side of the world that I work in.
And this is also something that I'm not sure if I'm mischaracterizing it. Please correct me. But right, and please forgive me making a, if I'm making a point that for you would seem obvious.
No,
So
please.
please forgive me, but you know the how should I put it? The um, it's very technical and it's all very detail oriented, and it has to be because it's a very complicated, complex process, right? Making a film, operating a camera
Mm-hmm.
that is a mechanical device, and also trying to capture something that is utilizing this mechanical technology. And so this technology requires certain detail-oriented decision-making process. And so it may sound to, uh, I mean, when I was, say, uh, um, growing up, I would try to get into these details again from a layperson perspective, but I would always get lost because I couldn't keep up because I didn't understand what this meant. And I could hear this thing about like what is it, like f stop or right. I don't
Yeah.
understand what this means, but
Uh-huh.
I understand it has a significance. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
So and I always fell into a line of thinking before where there was always this divide in my head
Mm-hmm.
between the technical aspect and the end result of the film. That's where I
Yeah.
fell into. That was the headspace I was in. But I and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like the opposite is true. In other words, in fact, this technical discussion, it might seem quote unquote technical, but in fact, it is very much at the heart and very consistent with uh, basically every discussion that's had, say, online about cinema, right? Because if it's all about perspective,
Yeah.
right? And it's about trying to capture a certain perspective. Because as you said, something can totally change in terms of one's perspective on a thing, how it's lit or how it's shot.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can look at a tree in the woods in the daylight and not be scared, or you can look at a tree in the woods at nighttime and it's quiet and dark with shadow, and it can be the scariest thing in the world, and everything in between. And that's a natural phenomenon as experienced from the subjective human experience. Like I'm
Yeah.
there in the woods. But the thing about film is, okay, there's that natural phenomenon and the subjective experience of every individual, but here we are and we have to try to capture that in objective terms using tools that are not human beings, not the eyeballs that are
Yep.
connected to the human brain, but rather we have to try to mimic that with technology and tools. And how are we going to do that? And so that shows not just essentially the sophistication of the human brain, which is
Mm-hmm.
almost it's very difficult to try to mimic, but we must do our best to do so in
Oh
order
yeah.
to elicit a some kind of subjective experience on the part of the viewer. But also it leads to all these fascinating avenues, even within that seemingly simple operation of me looking at a tree. It leads to all these possibilities of what that tree means to me. Am I truly understanding what the tree is? Or maybe I am misinterpreting what the tree is. Maybe
Yeah.
I am totally, maybe it is really menacing and I'm not figuring that out. Or so it leads to all these possible, say, psychological implications, right? And that's, I think, one of the great benefits of watching cinema. Thus, the cinematography or lighting or camera or lens usage or distance usage, and even the detailed specs within each field become essential for that ultimate discussion, right? Which is perspective.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
subjective
Complete.
experience and how to
Yeah.
achieve that objectively. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly. No, it makes perfect sense. And what's crazy is it's an object it's a subjective creation that is turned into an objective experience, which is interpreted subjectively. It keeps going round and round because, and here's the thing: I could give you a camera, I could take a camera, and we could give four of our friends cameras, and I'll say, let's go take a picture of a tree. We're all going to have a different version of a tree. The type of tree you want to take a picture of is different from the type of tree I might want to take of. My height might be different from your height. So my tree might be looking up at it because maybe I'm short in stature, where someone who might be taller might be getting a more higher perspective of it. You might be taking a picture of it in a street light, so it has a different color look. I might be taking it in the daytime or in the morning when the light is the prettiest for me in my town. It's all subjective. And a good director of photography studies light, just looks at light. Like for right now, if I'm looking at you right now, Daisuke, I can tell that you have a window off to your right because I see blue daylight coming in through the window. I know that you have a light on your desk to your left that is creating a warm glow, which is the tungsten source, which is a practical source. I know there's an overhead light above you because of the way that your bookcases have shadows coming down in them. So I know right now there's 3 light sources. Plus, your face is being lit by your computer monitor, which also is casting a small bit of a green cast to your skin tone. These are all just by staring at you right now. Now, that's great because here's what we're doing. Your uplight, your top light is creating depth in your picture because now you have shadows on your bookcase creating a sense it's not flat. There's a sculpture to it. By having blue light coming in from your window versus your tungsten light, you're creating contrast, which creates a interesting image to look at. Looking at your face now has another layer of interest. Besides wanting to engage and talking with you, you now have a blue warm light, a blue light, cool light coming in from your window, a warm light coming from your desk, creating a contrast. And it's almost at a 3/4 your light coming in through your window right now, which gives you a bit of an edge light. So you have lit yourself spectacularly for your show, which is great. And so that's part of the whole thing, just studying light. What does, turn off the light in your house? What does noon look like in your house? What does 8 o'clock at night look at your house? Like, what does it look like in that window of your room? Cinematographers do this all the time. They do these things called light studies. Like, if we're going to go film at a practical location, they might visit it 3 or 4 times and say, okay, at this location, I want to film here between 4 in the afternoon and 8 o'clock at night. And then after that, the light is horrible in this room. Anytime before or anytime after, it's just, we can't film here. And they'll do these light studies. We'll go out in the city streets at night and take pictures and find the best areas to kind of film that we can use. And then it's through that subjective idea of, when you close your eyes and you picture a tree at night, what do you picture? And that's what the DP wants to show. And then you got to add, what is a scary tree? What is a sad tree? What is a happy tree? Now you have to start imbuing these images with emotions, and you can do that with camera angle, with light, with color, all these things to tell your story. Because if you're being broken up with at a bar, how does the bar look? Is it bright and cheerful, adding insult to the injury of being broken up because everyone else is having a good time there? Is it dismal and dreary because it has to feel the mood of what you're feeling? Is this a subjective story where you remember it as being a horrible place? If we go to the dumpy versus the dumpers perspective, how does that bar change in terms of color? So it's subjective in terms of the DP, with the director deciding what is the core of the story and how to best to help support it. Anytime you see camera work that is distracting from a story, it is a director of photography who does not understand the story or wants to be more important than the story. And that always takes me out of a film. Um, I it I There's examples I could talk about, but I don't like to disparage movies. But I would say something like, I know a lot of people love this movie. I have issues with it in terms of its visual style. Is That's Requiem for a Dream, the Darren Aronofsky film, shot by Matthew Libatique. There's moments in that movie where the camera work surpasses the story and the theme of what's going on, which detracts from the story itself to me, which makes me then step away from the emotional content of the film and disengage, because then I'm saying, oh, look at that camera move, instead of look at the emotion that's happening right now to that character. And as soon as that happens, I go, nope, this person is putting themselves before the subject, which is hard. It's very hard. So sometimes when people talk about the greatest camera moves ever, sometimes that's all they are. Like, well, what's the story of the movie? Did it serve the story of the movie? You think about something like uh the glass of milk in is it Notorious or
Oh, the Hitchcock Suspicion.
yes, Suspicion. There we go.
Oh, yeah,
Suspicion. The
yeah.
glass of milk. It is a long camera move up the stairs following this glass because this is the most important thing for that moment. and our camera is doing exactly what it needs to do. There is a light underneath the glass that they have put there, running a wire down to the sleeve so that that milk is glowing just a little bit because our eyes are wanting to go there. And that is supporting a story versus the camera going up the stairs, around us, round and round, coming down, flying through, and then getting to a glass. That's the travel. The glass is the thing. It's the most important thing of the story, and Hitchcock knows what's important. These are directions. That's why I don't ever believe in auteur theory. Auteur theory can only get you so far. Auteur theory doesn't take into account that there are 40 other people behind the scenes helping guide this film. There's no director. I mean, there's very few. I'm sure there's a couple that literally have control of every aspect of their film and rely on no one and make them all by themselves. Those guys are called animators because no one else is involved. If they're just drawing the picture and animating it, doing the voices, making their music, everything else is collaboration. There's always collaboration. Directors and DPs have final say on things, but a lot of times we're bringing all kinds of answers to the table. It's not it's these are all the answers, pick the one you want. And so someone had to make those choices for that DP before they make that choice. And those people are the unsung people that, that's why auteur theory I always think is meh, sure, but not really. There's so many other aspects of film that are you're discounting when you say that the director is the sole voice of a film.
Oh, thank you so much. And also thank you very much for the real time shot breakdown. That's never happened to me before. I'm very, very flattered. Thank you. Yes. So
No, I was
I'm
trying to think. I'm sitting there going, well, what's the easiest way to explain some lighting? Well, I'll just break down the
That's
lighting of you
amazing.
right now.
That's amazing. That's amazing. You were saying this thing about the, oh yeah, I have a light up there. I forgot. So thank you so much. That was amazing. But yes, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right about that. Let me confirm there is a window here. There is a light. It's not a professional light. It's just one of these desk lights.
Oh
And then
yeah,
I have, because if I turned it off with this little switch, I have a
yeah.
switch here. If I turn it off, it just goes like this.
Oh
So
yeah,
how does,
totally different.
yes, is it? Yes. So, and now there we
Oh
go.
yeah,
So,
there you go.
and then I have the room light up there. So, but oh my goodness, where so much I want to ask, so little time. Um, I suppose the one of the questions that sometimes comes up is this relationship between, say, the director and the cinematographer or the director of photography. And this we often hear, or not maybe often, it sometimes or often comes in conversation about the director's role and the director of photography's role, and also perhaps ideally you'd want to have their visions be in sync. But
Hmm.
as we know, in just in life, like with anything, we're not always in sync with everyone around us all the time. And that's true
Yes,
in life. That's true in our jobs. That's
and
also
that's
true, I'm
where
sure, in filmmaking, right? I mean,
yeah, that's
in terms of you are in the filmmaking world and you see the process act out.
yeah, that's
In
where compromise comes in.
Yeah.
Like marriage, you're not always in sync. So compromise is the way that we get to a balance, right? Like I can't do this anymore, you can't do that anymore. Let's figure out a way that things can happen where there can be synchronicity through compromise. And that's where sometimes like some directors and DPs have worked together for years and they're in sync. They have a
Mm,
shorthand, they know what each other like versus
okay.
some teams which are they're combative, and sometimes some people love that. I know that I have friends that I go sit with them for an evening meal and I'm like, I can't believe these people are married, and they thrive on friction. Like that's what keeps their juices flowing, that keeps their goals alive. And some directors, some cinematographers thrive on friction to be able to kind of keep that energy going throughout a project. And it's very funny when that happens because that sometimes can create tensions on set. But from the very beginning, there was, directors work with actors. The first directors were actors. telling actors what to do, and the camera people were technical people that worked with how to process the film and tell the story that way from the very beginning of cinema. So we've evolved that way to kind of still have that relationship, but at some point the director kind of rose in popularity, um, while the cinematographer kind of became the workman that can kind of like does isn't as popular. People go to see movies for actors or directors. Um, Super duper film freaks will go see movies based solely on cinematographers sometimes, or composers, or you know whatever field that you're the most interested in. You know who the greats in your field are. So it's interesting, that dynamic, that I'll give you a perfect example of a team that on paper worked together once really well, and then on a following feature they were in completely different worlds. So if I go back to my example of Apocalypse Now, Storaro and Francis Ford Coppola. That movie is well regarded, world renowned as one of the greatest movies of all time, visually, everything. The stories told about that movie are ridiculous and numerous. But then you go one movie later and you go to One from the Heart. Um, Here is a movie where at some point in that film, Storaro says, well, he's not telling me what to do anymore because he's hiding in his Airstream trailer using George Lucas's edit droid to make a video edit of this film and not coming out and doing anything. So I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want. The visuals of that movie overtake the story. The story slowly disappears into oblivion. These poor actors are left dangling, not knowing what to do in any given scene. And the music, the musical numbers end up becoming these weird music videos that you could tell Storaro's directing because it's all about the visuals. So he employs thousands of these insane techniques to tell this story. And you have to think that at some point he just said, well, I'm not getting any direction anymore, so I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want. And you see this complete break from the tight knit uh, symbiosis they had together on Apocalypse Now. You go to their next movie, and they are like a chasm apart in terms of what each is their concerns are. And Storaro is winning because he's left to his own devices so much that he's just light colors are insane. He's doing double scrim things where he turns the light off and all of a sudden people are in each other's apartments through a wall, and then the camera moves and it's a shared set, and then it's absolutely bonkers because the story doesn't work in terms of what the visuals are doing, because the visuals are surpassing whatever story elements there are. I highly recommend it. It's hard to see. You can find a DVD copy. I don't have a nice Blu-ray of it, but it's a movie that definitely would do well from another restoration because that movie is gorgeous. But it is just it's thematically and story wise, it is very very weak.
And this also brings me to the question, because even from a, say, physical media perspective, and as you say, you also enjoy films and the physical media perspective, and then also the, what is it, Criterion
Mm-hmm.
Collection, and as we know, it's not just Criterion, it's also other labels and other releases, but sometimes we get these director approved versions, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we get versions that are acknowledged as being approved by the director of photography or cinematographer. And so sometimes there might be versions that are, say, director approved, or maybe there's a version that's, say, director of photography approved, etc. And most of the time I think there's sync up on that, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
every once in a while there might be some differences between the various approved versions. And so uh, in general, what kind of advice would you give, say, to people like me who watch films now, I think primarily on physical media, especially with all the choices that are given to us. I, I mean, I assume that you feel like we really should try our best to pay attention to these sorts of details when it comes to specific releases, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a level. I know there's, I think we were all hurt by George Lucas messing with his footage films and not giving us the movies we grew up with. So now there's a distrust of what people are doing when they start tinkering. Um, but for the most part, a newer transfer sometimes can actually reveal, you know, it's like a painting that goes through a restoration. They clean off all the shellac and the lacquer and the smoke, and it was sitting in a church for 500 years, and so it's just covered in incense and smoke, and so it's dirty. And a good cleaning all of a sudden reveals the vibrancy and the depth and the textures of a painting, just like that with cinema. I know. I think the last time I courted controversy was with the re-release of True Stories, Criterion re-release of True Stories. There was a lot of people complaining about the color quality of that and how it did not reflect the one they saw when they were younger. And going going back and reading about the history of that movie, it comes to find out that, you know, when studios were putting things on VHS and sometimes even on DVD, they might release the work print of it. They're not, or just whatever print they have. They didn't clean them up to put them on VHS. And a lot of DVDs are poured overs from VHS. Sometimes even with the incorrect aspect ratios, with the wrong mats on them. There was all kinds. It was a wild west of kind of. There was no curatorial aspect to any of the releases. And if Warner Brothers can release a movie without having to spend any money on it and just make money on it, they're going to do that. And for VHS years, there was lots of that going around. So something you might have watched on VHS a million times and you have the images seared into your memory. On the other hand, there's a cinematographer looking at that VHS and weeping because that is not the movie they shot. That is not the print they struck. That is not what was in cinemas. It was just a horrible facsimile made off a work print to quickly put out onto VHS because we were going to make some more money off this film. So when a director of photography goes back and cleans up something and releases it how it's truly originally meant to be seen, it's that whole, you have to come to terms with the fact that your memories of things are your memories, and you can't fault a person who has had a bad memory of this their whole entire lives from what their original intention was, to not be able to present it the way they wanted to. You'll always have your memories, you'll always have your VHS copy of this movie if you really want it, but for the most part, these movies, like when they're cleaning them up, they're fixing them up. You might not be getting the exact thing you remember, but sometimes that's a good thing because it opens up a whole new way of seeing things. Something that might have been drab and kind of bland now takes on a whole new depth and layering that you might not have seen before because it wasn't presented in a positive light. Um, and that's kind of the difference between a curatorial restorative idea of uh, cinema, which is what we're getting in something like the Criterion Collection or Arrow Video, or these companies that are doing their own restorations of films, versus something like a big studio who has a catalog of 5,000, 500,000 titles, and they're just going to just put them out. And if you notice, the only ones that they consistently put out like every couple of years with new restorations and stuff are their marquee ones, and the other films are just left to kind of gather dust and be put out in whatever form that's available. So you got to remember that a lot of these companies that are putting out these boutique label versions of these films, they're passionate people who want to see film justice served and these movies to be brought back to life in the way that they are meant to be seen originally. So it's hard because there is that idea, you have to you have to kind of go inside yourself and reconcile your memory with things and how things really were. And I think you need to do that with everything in life anyway. Eventually, a good memory is going to be tainted by some information you find out later. Oh, that was the most beautiful day I had in the picnic with my friend. And then you find out 10 years later that that afternoon, that friend that you had this wonderful day with was the worst day of that person's life because their parent died that afternoon and you had no idea. And so now that memory is tainted by this new information. And that's how life works. It's always new information that is coming in and changing and morphing and growing, and that's the same with film. You're seeing it as this one way and you've changed, and then now you're seeing it in a new way, and then someone comes along and says, here's what it's supposed to look like, and now you're getting to revisit it in a different way. It's fun, it's exciting. I think it's good to kind of look and make sure you're getting new transfers of things, but it's not something you should, it's not a hill you should always die on, because sometimes it's, just seeing the film is worth the effort. It's like seeing it in a theater versus seeing it at home. Sometimes it's the only way you can see it, but it's hard. It's a hard thing to do, because you've also have to take into consideration the companies that are doing it. Are they doing it in your best interest or in the artist's best interest, or are they doing it to, make money? Because that's the other thing that we've never talked about, is that this is a we keep on talking about the aspirational goals of film as being artistic, but they're also revenue. It's money, it's monetary, which is really hard, because a lot of decisions are made based on money in film. Talking about what a director does, you were saying earlier, picking this light. Well, we could pick this light is the best light to use for this, but can we afford that light? Or we need the best actor we can get, so now we have to cut down everything else in the budget because we can't afford anything else because we got the actor we wanted. It's very interesting. It's very interesting how that all works out.
No, thank you so much for that. And it's as you were speaking, I was really struck by a number of things. For example, the idea of restoration is, of course, a very relevant one, especially in home media consumption, and especially now in the days of restoration of films, for example. It's always happened. I mean, there's this. It's happens in other forms of art, of course, as we know, but it does bring up a number of questions too, in terms of the restoration process itself, and which you allude to, and the idea of something that I think Martin Scorsese mentioned in one of the interviews that's included in the release, the Rolling Thunder Review, Bob Dylan story
Mm-hmm.
by Martin Scorsese, that Criterion release, and he mentions the work print quality of the performance footage that was relied upon for that film, but that footage was then subject to restoration upon its usage by Scorsese and company for the assembly of the and making of the film. But he brought up a really interesting point, which was that too had a certain there was a necessity to consider that from, say, a film philosophical perspective, because it looks there's something also to be said about the use of the work print, and that being close to the time that the actual subject matter was taking place, namely the performance, versus the restoration, which may look cleaner and sharper and thus closer to reality. But is it really? Because it's still
Mm-hmm.
removed because of the fact it's being restored after the fact. And so it does bring up this interesting dilemma that I never thought about. And your conversation reminds me of that very much so. It's in other words, it's much more complicated.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's 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 a lot more complicated, because you know you have to, there's that idea of grain structure within film. And modern filming,
Mhm.
restoration, we're scanning into a computer, and we can almost eliminate these ideas. Like film it was a photochemical reaction. So there's these, like, imagine kind of like chloroform. You have these crystals that are light sensitive crystals on film. And depending on the type of stock, the speed of the stock, the crystals are larger or smaller. So it creates this grain structure. And old school cinematographers could look at a movie and tell you what film stock it's shot on based upon its grain structure and how it handles the color green. It's very strange. Kodak is a completely different film stock from Fuji. Fuji has a different grain structure and a different green cast than a Kodak. Kodak tends to go into the more orange and browns, where Fuji's tends to highlight a more green tints to things. So, and then you don't even talk about a Russian Moss film and their type of it's the film structure they were using. That was all these browns and reds. So you could look at all these film stocks and you could tell the differences. And so here comes the problem. When we go to restore these, we can get rid of a lot of this grain that might have otherwise separated you from fully enjoying it because the grain structure is too big, especially when they're doing like night shots or with old 1970s zoom lenses. The amount of light sensitivity was diminished greatly because of the length of the lens. So now we have these images that are imperfect. But now comes the question, do we remember them because of their imperfection? Are their imperfections now the thing that makes this what it is? If we remove these imperfections, are we not erasing film history? Are we not erasing our ability to recognize where they stand in the history of cinema? It's almost like, I'm going to completely forget the name of this art form. It is a Japanese art form where we are putting back together something is broken by using gold. Um, it's it's used in pottery and stuff like that. So they take all these porcelain pieces and then they're using gold filament to kind of keep them back together. So it's highlighting its flaws. I can't remember that process, but that's kind of how we have to treat film. We have to say, we have to look at it in the totality of what the film means, its time period, its history, and know where we can and can't erase to be able to keep this alive, and remembering like where it's from and what it's a part of. So you might have to make tough decisions and say, we need to keep it looking like this, even though it might not be perfect, because to make it perfect is to erase what made it perfect. Which is it, like that's a archivist's and restoration person's moral dilemma that they're always making every day. What is something to remove, what is a blemish, and what is a beauty mark?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes. What is it? Kintsugi, I think.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not an expert in it, but yeah, the application of some kind of metal
Mm-hmm.
to like on the broken bits or the parts, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So so this is very interesting. So the uh my goodness, uh thank you so much for this, because it really it's this is such an important type of explanation that you provide, because it really is it please pardon me for the indulgence, but I really have to say, because your talk is so wonderful for a number of reasons. Again, right, because you remind me that it could be said that cinema, well, first of all, it reminds me that when you're talking about chemical processes and chemical reactions and how certain chemicals or combinations of chemicals combine with, say, some kind of reaction to light or something, or there's some kind of process that's chemical based one that leads to a combination of colors that are, when looked at, create what we call an image that then can be projected onto screen. But it reminds me too that even our own emotions, when we think about how we feel, the thing, I don't know exactly what the specific process names are, but if we have a certain feeling, like if we fall in love, right? That
Hmm.
can be expressed in terms of poetry or art or expression or song or dance, and we
Or
celebrate that,
yeah,
right? But it's
exactly.
also a chemical reaction in
Hmm.
our body because we some kind of chemical is causing this feeling that is also based on whatever it is, the synapse or the types of reactions that occur and are connected to our human brain, and that leads to some kind of response, which is a chemical based one, if one thinks about it. And so, but that's also very much linked to the emotional, very much like the cinematography aspect and the chemical based aspect. The chemical reactions are all leading to what ultimately is a type of emotional experience, hopefully on
Oh
the
yeah.
part of the viewer watching, and as also on the people who are making the film as well. And then also the idea, which is very bold, and I never thought about it until you were talking just now, which is how we look back on something and how we might misremember something, even about a film. And that actually leads to this idea of what one might think is permanent is actually not that permanent. And when we think about the versions, the various versions of films that can exist, you mentioned George Lucas as an example, but when I think about all these versions, then I think we can realize that, yeah, it's actually maybe not as permanent all the time like as we might think. So there's almost this illusion of permanence even with cinema, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because that's
Oh
also
no.
just a further reflection of it's not just cinema, right? It's how we react
Oh
to
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's when you start getting into cinephilia, where it's your memory of the moments that aren't inclusive to the subject matter of the film, but to the emotional state and the minutia of details that you remember. I think there's a famous line, the wind through the trees, like how excited they were to see trees rustling in the background of a scene because they were filming outside as opposed to on an enclosed set. There's that whole concept of that, and it's funny because our eyes react differently to photochemical light processes versus digital processes, because digital processes are an interpretation of light, whereas photochemical process is a capturing of light, and then there's a retention. It's a weird. It works into different parts of your brain. There's a great documentary. I don't know if people should seek this out. Produced and narrated by Keanu Reeves of all people. It's called Side by Side, and it's about film versus digital, and that's a great history. It tells you all about the history of film and the film processes, teaches all about digital and the digital processes. It goes as far as to show how your brain reacts to each version of it and why it's taken so long for digital to kind of overtake film as the means of production. But in the end, it is that chemical reaction is what has stimulated us into enjoying these things for so long. Going back a little further, you're talking about something we were talking about earlier about um, the what we remember and what we see. The other thing you have to also remember is that, like in the world of photography, we look at books of photography and we're seeing a facsimile of the photograph. We're not looking at the photograph, which is when we're looking at our Blu-rays, we're looking at a facsimile of something that was filmed. And the only true way to see it is if you made this film, printed it, and you looked at that print in a theater that day with those people the first time. After that, film starts to change. It chemically decomposes. Every time it goes through a projector, it starts getting scratches and buffs and tears and rips. Every time it goes to a theater, it's being cut and retaped. Every time it is transferred to VHS, it's a facsimile of a facsimile of a facsimile. And then you also think of someone like Robert Frank, who is a famous photographer who did these fantastic like Americana images, and he only made 3 prints of this image. Each print is supposed to be the same, but if the chemical bath was a little warmer, if the light bulb is a little dimmer in his transfer station, if all that stuff is just slightly infinitesimally different things, are those truly the same items? Is that print on your left the same as the print on your right? It technically cannot be, just due to the nature of time. So, if you want to really get into the craziness of it, we're never seeing the true image, because the true image is always through a layer of things. So, to beat ourselves up over color timing, or to beat ourselves up over this because we're not getting the actual thing, we'll never get the actual thing. It's an illusion, which is part of movie magic. It's part of our memory. Our memory is the thing that we cherish, because that is the thing that gives you your biochemical reaction, like falling in love. It's nostalgia and memory of the films we see that give us the happiness and joy that we remember, which is the most important part, I think.
Oh no, bravo, well said. No, 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 no. That's excellent. And um, you know, I, uh, you've given me so much to think about here, and in fact, this illusion is much more fundamental than perhaps I had originally given it credit for. And so, and what I call illusion, you've just now called movie magic, and I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. I'm going to borrow that if you don't mind, actually.
Whatever.
Yeah,
Please
I think
do.
that's great. Yes.
Please do.
So, well done. Well done. You've really given me a lot to consider. And so, my goodness, I, uh, this is always one of the things I I realize now that we've been speaking for some time now. It feels like it's just I feel like I'm just getting started. To be
Oh, I
perfectly
know. We
honest,
could
I know.
we could we could talk for hours. I love talking. I love doing this. This is so much fun. I appreciate this.
Uh,
I haven't got to talk about the like different theories and stuff like that for so long. It's great. I love this conversation we're having.
you've really given me a lot to think about here. No, truly. And so uh, I would really love to continue this on maybe very
Yeah,
soon if you're okay with that.
totally. Well, we can do a
Uh,
part two.
That'll be great. And so because as I say, this is the type of perspective, especially that I need, because I don't have this within me. And so I learned so much today. So thank you so much for this, Travis.
Well, thank you for the
Um,
great questions, because I, you know, a lot of these things are theories and you can put them into perspective in terms of like when you're watching a movie and have specificities, but to just talk about it in a broader kind of sense is super fun, because you know, that's where you get creatively excited. They're like,
mm,
after having this conversation, now I'm all excited again about film. Every single time this happens, I get all excited about film again. And I love that. That's why I love talking about this stuff.
I didn't even ask you. The question I wanted to ask is, what are the concerns about shooting in black and white versus what are the concerns about shooting in color? You mentioned a little bit about
Oh,
color, but
yeah.
oh my goodness, I'm going to have to save that for next time.
All right. We'll
All
say
right,
that. We'll talk
so.
about color theory next time.
So, but so yes, let us continue this conversation again, hopefully very soon, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah. That'd be great.
And so, because uh, this conversation has been mind blowing. Thank you so much for this, Travis.
Oh, thank
Truly,
you.
no, truly, thank you. And I do want to ask you before we end today, which is Travis Trudell, you as we mentioned at the outset, you, of course, have your film discussion podcast life. And so uh, you have the complete podcast. And so we'll share a little bit about that before we go. But before that, you've mentioned a number of great film references and recommendations today. But if you like, would it be okay to hear from you about what are some film recommendations or recommendations in general? What are some other things that you think I and some other people should check out? So, could you please share with us, in closing, some of your recommendations
Y-
about film or anything?
Yeah. So in talking about film and talking about film with you, one of the things I think that is the biggest growth I've had lately. Uh, I have two children, and my goal has been to make them cinema watchers, viewers of film, to and appreciators of film. And one of the biggest tools that I had for that, I'm going to reach behind me here, that I wanted to share because I want the world to become better educated about film and to start enjoying it on a deeper level. And the best way to do that is, like anything, teach the young how to appreciate cinema. It breaks my heart every time I hear someone say, "Oh, is that in black and white? I don't know if they'll like that. They'll be probably bored." And I'm just like, "Oh, please stop it with that." There was black and white cinema was a lot. We've had just as much black and white cinema as we have color in the past. We have to be able to teach. So I would highly recommend this book by Ty Burr. It's called The Best Old Movies for Families: A Guide to Watching Together. Now, the thing that really kind of got me going on that book is that I wanted to have a language to be able to talk to my kids about older movies. And what Tiber has done is kind of gone through and given you some fantastic lists where to kind of steer away from, because you think about things like, oh, it's King Kong. That'll be a fun monster movie for the kids to watch. And then you watch King Kong, and there's so many things that you have to have discussions about. And there's some really scary violence that you kind of put off because you're just, it's a stop motion animation film, so you're kind of not thinking about it. But when Kong's crushing gorillas and crushing villagers and biting the heads off of people, a really young kid is going to take that really to heart. So you have to kind of worry about that stuff, and then not to mention all the uh, racial issues based in that movie, and as a product of his time. So that book has lists of like where to start with them with westerns, the age ranges where this might play really well, how to talk about alcoholism as comedy in older movies. It just has all these great talking points and great lists and great jumping off points to get your family into watching these. And part of that is coming up with rules for like what movie night means. I have so many friends that just say, well, we just end up watching the same four movies because that's what the kids want to watch. And I want to say, well, it's your job as the adult to present things for people to be able to experience. Whether they like it or not, you have to keep presenting. You don't just give your kids noodles all the time because that's what they like. You have to give them vegetables. You have to give them proteins. You have to balance things. And if that includes how you take in art and how you take in film. And so that is an excellent book that gives you a good insight on how to start that process with your family or even yourself. If you have a very limited knowledge of the history of movies, it also is a great reference point to start building up past films, because it's from movies from 1960s back. There's no modern movies in that book, so it's all about like which Marx Brothers movie to start with your children first, which Buster Keaton, how to watch silent films with your kids, just different things that so instead of it becoming a traumatic experience of forcing them to watch your favorite silent movie, it's something that they want to come to naturally and start enjoying with you. which then helps you build that relationships sometimes that you really look forward to. So I would say if that's going to recommendation, it's to help make better film goers in the future.
Thank you very much, Travis. I
Thank you,
really
Daisuke.
appreciate that. Thank you. That's a wonderful recommendation. So thank you. And I too will take that to heart, very much so. So thank you. And last but not least, before we go, I do want
Hmm.
to once again just mention your podcast and where people might be able to find you with through your work with Matt on the complete. So could you just let people know where people
Um,
could find you?
so I have taken a social media break, and it's been very healthy for me. But you can find me on Letterboxd, Travis Trudell on Letterboxd. You can read my diary entries, my film reviews, and stuff like that. You can find the complete podcast on iTunes, or sorry, Apple, iPod, any of your podcatchers. Um, they're on most of them. And then the complete podcast on Twitter is something you can follow, where we post what we got going on, what we got coming up next. And I believe from that, you can also go to our website, which has a complete listing of the movies we've done so far, and links to where you can listen to them.
And I will do my best to include all of that information in the description box so people can check that out. And I strongly, strongly recommend that they do if they haven't already. So, Travis Trudell, thank you so much, my dear friend, for taking the time out to do this. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daisuke. I really appreciate you taking the time to think about me and consider me someone worth talking to. And it really, really warmed my heart to hear you reach out to me, because in this time of all this craziness and stuff, making connections is my favorite. And it's so nice to chat with you as long as we have.
Thank you very much, my friend. And we will continue this hopefully very soon. But in the meantime, of course, just continue to be well, and
Thank you
we will
too,
stay
sir.
in touch. So
You
thank
too.
you, Travis. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.